Bom dia, Walmyr. Thank you so much
Good morning, Scott.
for that's all my Portuguese. So uh, thank you so much for meeting with me. We worked together at GitLab a while ago. Super impressed with how you approach testing and your philosophies behind it. You had me on your podcast not too long ago, which actually inspired me to start this. So I'm super excited to have you with us. Could you just give us a little background about what you're up to and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to be here as well. Thanks for inviting me. So my name is Walmyr. I'm a QA engineer. I've been working with quality assurance and testing automation for quite a while, since 2004. And I've been doing testing automation for more than 10 years now. I have a focus more on web applications, but I have already worked with like mobile native apps as well. Um, I am the author of a blog called Talking About Testing, where the content is only in Portuguese, but I have also a dev community profile with content in English. So most of my content on my Portuguese blog, I translate to dev community as well. I have a YouTube channel where I have one playlist called English content, where I have interviewed yourself. And I have an online school as well with lots of courses. It's basically my profile on Udemy. And yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
Staying busy.
Yes.
And so how long have you been doing your online course stuff full time?
Full time, I have started this year in February 2021, but I have started doing online courses in 2018. So I started growing it slowly, and this year I decided to dedicate full time on growing this and see where I can head by doing just online courses and my own stuff.
Awesome. And how many students do you have now?
Summing up the two platforms that I use, which is Coursify.me and Udemy, I have more than 5,000 students at the moment.
Awesome. Cool.
It's really cool.
Yeah. That's a huge inspiration, and I think a lot of engineers want to go the info products route. So I hope people see this and get inspiration from what you've done. I have a couple questions for you that I want to go through. I think testing is really important because it can either make or break your development workflow and your product. And that's seen that kind of when we work together and stuff. Right? So I just wanted to get your perspective. Like, what's the point about testing? Why should we care?
Yeah. So I think there are a few points. One of them is that you want to ensure that the things that you are building work right. You want to make sure that a feature that you have developed works properly based on the requirements that someone from the product side, for instance, gave you, that will solve a problem of a real user, right? So you test your software to understand if it works as it should. But also it provides you with quick feedback if you implement automated tests, for instance, and if they are fast, you can have quick feedback that when you are working on something, you can understand if you have broke something and you have to fix it before you move on to your next task, sorry. Or if everything is green, you can move on to your next task. But if you have some failing tasks, you know that you might have broken something, and then you can quickly look into it, fix it, and move forward. But I think the most important point of testing is to have safety of changing your app while you are building it, and making sure that, like, if you break something, you get feedback as soon as possible and you fix it before you push this change to your final users. So I think these are like the most important points, in my opinion.
And so what's can you go through the different levels of testing? Like unit, end to end, and just kind of from the bottom
Yeah,
up or other way?
there are lots of, if we think about testing, there's a huge possibility of levels of testing. So some that come to my mind are like unit testing, which is when you were testing a very isolated unit of your application, like a function, a class, a method of a class, or something like that. There's also component testing, which is kind of a unit testing for front-end applications where you can test your separate components in isolation. There is integration testing when you have to integrate your app with a third-party service or simply a service being developed by another team inside of your organization. There's API testing for like RESTful APIs or GraphQL APIs, things like that. You can think about front-end testing, meaning you test the front-end decoupled from the backend, for instance, but not just like the components in isolation, the whole front-end built, but isolated from the backend. We can think about end-to-end testing, where we are testing the thing as a whole from the perspective of the user. What else? There is mutation testing, which is a technique that you use to make sure that your unit testing are really testing something. So mutation testing is a really interesting, it's a really interesting testing activity that you change some parts of the app and your unit test should fail because you changed the app, you mutated how your app should behave. So for instance, there is a calculation that does something that should be greater than 0, and you simply change it to less than 0. And if you had that test for that specific case, the test should fail. So you mutate your app and your unit test should fail. If you mutate your app and all your tests are failing, probably your unit testing are not good enough. And we can think about contract testing, especially if we are doing kind of microservices where you have lots of small services integrating and communicating with each other. We can have accessibility testing for accessibility purposes, visual testing. This is a very interesting one that you can, for instance, you can have an app that is functionally working, but it's completely broken from a visual aspect. So you can have automated testing to take snapshots of your app, render in different screen sizes and things like that. And you make sure that it renders well, not only it works, right? And we can think about performance testing, load testing, stress testing, calls testing, security testing. There are lots of testing.
Yeah.
It's difficult to think about like just a few, but these are like the ones that are most common, I think.
So okay, let's say, I think a lot of people understand the value of testing, but there's so many options that they don't know where to start, or maybe they put effort towards something that's completely useless, and then they don't find value, and then now they have a bad taste in testing. If I were to start a company with you, and I'm like, set up our test harness for is most valued, lowest cost in terms of engineering resources, out of these options that you just went through, where would you focus your attention?
Yeah, so I look into it in the sense of like different companies, they have different stages, right? So if you are a startup and you are just trying to find out a business model, you are still not making money, probably you would focus less on, you would invest less in lots of automation because you don't know if your business is gonna make money or if you need to change it rapidly to something else. So probably you would invest less in automation and more in exploratory testing and dogfooding your own product. But when you realize that you found your business model, you already have some users paying for your product or for your service, then you might need to invest in the basics like unit testing, end-to-end testing, integration testing. And when it's time to scale now, you already have, and it's important that you have these basic tests because they are what will allow you to move fast and to change the app while you are developing it, but knowing that if you break something, a test will catch it, right? And then when it's time to scale, then you would start thinking about performance testing and things more robust to ensure that not just your app works, but also it will behave in extreme conditions very well as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I personally think a lot of engineering teams just test for testing's sake, not thinking about what's going to capture the most value, knowing that it'll break, right? Like if I unit test my component, like really coupled, and then the whole user experience stays the same, but I refactor how the code actually works or the architecture implementations, then all my unit tests are going to break. So it's like, at what point, where's the balance between like, okay, I want things to break, but minimally just to get feedback that, like you said, where are you at? Like, is this for engineering purposes? Is this for user purposes? That's super interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest mistakes engineers and companies make from a testing perspective?
Okay, that's a good one. I think one of the most common mistakes is that companies like to think that they will have a quality department or a QA person that is going to be the one that will ensure that the product being developed has quality. And it's like, when you do this, you are kind of saying to your development team, in their subconscious, they might think we don't need to care that much about quality because there is a quality department that will take care of that. But the problem is that when you think about this, you don't care about, like, the QA team would be catching very trivial bugs that could have been prevented, could have been found earlier. So I think this is one of the biggest mistakes. Like, people don't look into quality as something that is everyone's responsibility. And this is how I prefer to look into quality. Quality is something that you should look from even before you write a line of code, right? You should care about the quality of your requirements, how you are gathering requirements with your customers, with your users, and then selecting from all these requirements which ones are the most important. And they have to have a minimum enough of quality for the developers that will build it to understand it exactly what it needs without going to back and forth with the business to get more details to have it implemented. And yeah, I think that's the biggest one. Like, people thinking that, like, if you have a quality department, your problem will be solved. But actually, this is gonna you have a lot of rework, because they will find the issues, and then when you are working on something else, you have to stop what you're doing to fix something, and rework is kind of a waste. So ideally, we should avoid wasting time and avoid wasting resources, and moving fast and delivering value to our users.
And how do you, so I know this is like a big question, but what things do you think about or implement to achieve that? Like, is it like, before we write a line of code, like, we have this mentality, like, quality is everyone's problem.
Yeah.
So then what are the steps we can take to communicate that, to avoid this back and forth and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think communication is the point. Like, when I join a company, like, I have worked in companies where I was the only QA in the company. So what I usually would do would be, like, the first month, I would try to disseminate this culture, that knowledge, that quality is everyone's responsibility. And some people will will accept that because they want a change, they want to be able to continue solving problems, but without having all the problems that they have in terms of, like, fixing bugs is not as fun as developing a new feature, for instance. And I think, like, sitting together with everyone in the company understanding what they do and trying to understand like what could be improved. So if in companies that I have worked, I have already like tried to understand like which people will be the early adopters of this change, for instance. And this will be my alliance on making this change. And I like to start small, like gather a group that they are interested in doing things different, in having quality in their mind. And then we start experimenting with this small team and the other teams, and they will, because they are doing this, they will start getting the benefits right. And then the rest of the team, the rest of the people around, they might start looking into what are they doing differently, because like they're not working overtime anymore. They're like they are not fixing that much bugs as we are. And then we can start disseminating this culture to other teams, because they are the ones that will resist the change in the beginning, but when they see the value, I think they will start, you know, understanding and getting used to it. So I think it's really about communicating the gains that you can have as a development team. And yeah.
Awesome. Sweet. That was great. It's a lot to think about. Like it's a total mindset shift.
It is, yeah.
What are your? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear it. What are your favorite testing technologies right now? And maybe like go through what were your favorite testing technologies and what are your favorite testing technologies?
What they were and what they are?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the past, I used to work for, so my expertise is in end-to-end testing for web apps. And in the past, I used to work with Protractor, which is a test framework created by the Angular team, which was used for testing Angular apps, but it was possible to use for testing non-Angular apps. And I had worked in the different sides, like for testing Angular and non-Angular apps. And I pretty much liked it when I worked with it, because it was simpler than other tools available in the market, in my opinion, like Selenium, for instance. It had a better documentation, and it solved my problems. I was able to test like video communication tools doing protractor tests. And nowadays, I kind of like a test framework called Cypress, which is super nice. Like it allows you to do a lot more than you were used to do with Selenium-based testing frameworks. So it allows you to do not just interact with the application through the user interface, but you can interact with the app through the network. You can interact with the app through the system directly. And it gives you power to control the app while you are testing it. And besides Cypress, which is for end-to-end testing, but you can use for component testing, for API testing, for front-end testing, I also like a tool called Applitools, which is for visual regression testing, which is this thing that you can, for instance, have your Cypress tests that will, for instance, in a login functionality, fill the login form, submit, and see that you were logged in correctly. But it will just look into elements in the screen and understand if they are there. But you can also, in the end of this test, say to the test, take a snapshot of the screen right now and send it to Applitools, and then it will be saved as a baseline. And when your test run again, it will compare to this baseline. And if you break it visually, like the test could work, could be able to log in, but the layout could be completely broken, right? So I like the Applitools for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think as a front-end engineer, like even on my own side projects, having like access to Cypress and some visual regression testing is so valuable, because you're moving so fast and you're touching so many different things that like it's, I think I don't think people put enough stake in visual regression testing and how important that is. Like think about the amount of times that someone just like accidentally adjusted CSS and a bunch of stuff broke.
Yeah, I think you start seeing the benefit when you start using it. I used it in different jobs, and in the beginning they were not catching that much bugs, but when they catch a bug that was visual, you saw the benefit, right? And the same with Cypress. Before you use it, it might sound super cool, but you have to use the tool to understand how valuable it can be and how productive you can be as a developer by using it, right? And one point that I wanted to mention that you briefly touched before, when you talked about I have a feature and I have refactored it, which means that I have changed it, how it's structured, but I don't want to change the behavior of the feature. And you mentioned and now I have lots of tasks to fix. So I think this is a case when you were probably testing too much of the details of your implementation instead of how your app or parts of your app should behave. So I think it's important that tests, they should look into the app or a part of app from the perspective of how should this app behave, or how should this component behave? What is the API of this component, which means what can I input into it and what should be the output, right? If you think about testing this way, you probably have the least tests failing in the end of your refactoring, and you catch the biggest failures. But if you test too much implementation details, every time you do a refactor, you have to change the tests, and then the tests starting to get just a pain, and you get rid of them and you lose all the benefits that they can bring you.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think think about how much, from a business perspective, how much engineers get paid by these companies, and how much time is spent dealing with what you just touched on.
Exactly.
I would comfortably guess billions of dollars wasted per year in time fixing things that, like you said, just changing the mindset. And it's something I'm guilty of too, right? I realize that I'm testing too much of the component internals and not the actual behavior. Something that I'm trying to work on is getting better at how I approach testing at work and on side projects as well.
I think bringing the economics to the game make you think about it differently, right? If you think about how many money is being spent that could be spent in building new features, improving the user experience, and so on and so forth, you would change your mind much faster than if you don't think about how much money is being spent, right?
Totally. Well, yeah, because I think engineers get lost. Not speaking for all engineers, and what I observe, engineers get lost in the task of engineering and not what's the point, right? Linting is a really interesting example, because linting takes time away from having to have these conversations about these little nitpick things. Automating that, but in the end that saves time. Saving time saves money. Saving time and money gives you more resources to throw at building features and fixing bugs. But
exactly,
I don't think the connection's made. It's this is valuable because, and then you just kind of move one step. No, I'm really glad you brought that up. We blew through all my questions. You read half the time. I wanted to is there anything we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about, or any questions you had for me? I know we have the podcast that we did together that I'll link as well.
Yeah, not really. I pretty much liked the conversation. It was really nice to have all these questions, because although I have this mentality already, it's great when you can share this kind of information with others. So I think I hope your audience will like it.
I hope so too. I know they will, and I'm going to do a little bit more research on. I'd like to maybe try out visual regression testing, or like one of those you mentioned, maybe like front end performance and performance like testing is something that I'm super interested in right now. So maybe play with one of those things, get a little bit more educated, and then have you on again, and we can like go deeper on things to think.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, Amplitude, the tool that I mentioned, they have like a free version that you can use with limited snapshots that you can take per month. What I like about this tool specifically is one of the things is that like in the past, visual regression testing was something like you take a screenshot of the app and then you compare pixel by pixel. And like if you have the app rendered on Windows and Linux, you might find differences because of the fonts. And there's no real bug, but you have like false negative results. And Amplitudes, they have different mechanisms for dealing with the things. So you can compare pixel by pixel, but you can also compare just the layout, or you can compare just like the content without caring about the layout. So if you are just caring about the content, it doesn't matter if the colors change, or if you have like very dynamic apps and you just want to care about the layout, the content might change, but your test will not fail. And they have like functionalities for like A/B testing. So how do you do visual regression testing when you have two versions of the same feature, right? So you can approve both snapshots as a baseline, and the test will continue to work, which I think it's really interesting.
That's awesome. Sweet. I'll try that out. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn and Twitter,
Okay.
mostly. And besides that, on my YouTube channel as well.
And what's your YouTube channels talk about testing, and then what's your Twitter handle?
It's it's weird. It's Walmyr Lima Silva. So I'll send that out to you, and then you can put in the description of the video, because my last name is kind of long.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking. Hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Awesome. See ya.
Yeah.